Okay, second. Perfect. Just waiting on notification. Okay, boom. And we are live. I want to thank everyone for tuning in to a very special edition of Off the Record on the People's Podcast tonight. We have an incredible guest with us, one who's going to give us some amazing information as well as inspiration, and that is our brother from Canada. He's going to give us the exactly location of where in Canada. Brother Roger A. Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Wa alaikum salam, sir. It's a
This
pleasure
is
to
an
be on,
extreme
brother.
honor
Thank you for
to have you
having
come
me
on the podcast.
from Montreal, Canada, Quebec, Canada, to be specific.
Okay. Yes, sir. Okay, perfect. All right, great. Now, Brother Roger, the first question that we would like to know, sir, is when did you first hear the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad?
Oh, yes, sir. Actually, and again, well, thank you for having me, and really, it's an honor to be on the People's Podcast. And just before I go, I just wanted to say thank you, brother Joshua, because especially during the pandemic, podcasts like yours really got us believers. Like when we were confined, I mean, it really kept us going. So thank you so much for that. But to your question, I mean, so I joined. Actually, I started my journey. I was a hip hop artist, a young hip hop artist in
Okay.
early '90s, and all locally and all, and it was influenced by some of the conscious hip hop back then, KRS One, X Clan, and so on. And I went to a show. I was actually doing a show, and it's in a park. It was part of a rally, a conscious rally by a group called AKAX, and a brother that I knew. His name is Garvin. Is still a good brother to this day, and he took me to the table where they were selling books, and I actually picked up the book back then, the autobiography of Malcolm X, and I picked up another book, which was actually Malcolm X's lecture. Back then I didn't even know the differences between Nation of Islam, Islam. I didn't know like any of that. So I started reading the autobiography, and I just really got into it. And ultimately, though, I had another brother, another friend of mine. He actually went up to a masjid, to an Orthodox masjid, and he said, "Oh, I went to this mosque, and he took, as they call it, the Shahada." And so in my first phase, and I went up to that masjid, and I took Shahada, and I started my journey as a quote unquote Orthodox Muslim. So I converted to Orthodox Islam, and still then didn't know too much about the Nation of Islam. And then I started to interact with the brothers, and my journey is kind of funny because as I started to really get into what they call Sunni Islam, I started getting into debates with some brothers, and really I started studying the teaching, looking at it as an antagonist, seeing it as, well, this is not real Islam, and as it's not. And so I started studying it to try to find arguments to defeat it. But the more I studied and the more I got into it and the more I learned, the more my mind started turning toward the teaching. And when I heard the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, I think it was like in 93, 94, something like that. It was a while back. And I remember thinking, it was the lecture Power at Last and Forever. And I remember thinking, I said, the spirit that came out of the minister, and I thought, and I was telling myself, I said, man, how can this man not be a true Muslim with a spirit like that? And that was like my first step. And more and more, I really began to opened my eyes to the teachings. And ultimately it like I began, and with the help, with there's one brother that really helped me. His name was Jean Robert, and he really helped me to kind of understand, because the biggest point for me was point number 12. I had a really,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
that's the point of contention. And I had the opportunity at the time to study even with scholars in Indianapolis, you know, and you know, just having a lot of that scholar, you know, Islamic scholarly influence. So it took me a while to wrap my head around it, but once I understood it, then it just then I just had to embrace it. And I remember getting in trouble with some of my Orthodox Muslim brothers who you know, one of them was studying in Saudi Arabia, and he wrote me a letter, and you know, questioning why, you know, I was like, so brother, you studied with the scholars, you studied with the imams, like you should know better. And really, what people don't understand, and my response to him was, well, the more you study the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, the more you see how it lines up perfectly with the teachings of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and takes it to the next level. And you realize that everything that has been written about the coming of the great Mahdi and the Messiah is really encapsulated by the coming of Master Farad Muhammad, who's now passed on that mantle of Mahdi to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Messiah to the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. But it was that journey. So at the beginning, I came in. I mean, I was a bit difficult to deal with when I would come into some of the mosque meetings or the study group meetings. I mean, you know, in the early days, man, sometimes they kicked me out. I didn't want to pray. I said, no, I don't pray to Master Father Muhammad. I'm not praying. But they were patient with me. And there's one lecture that was a tape that was given to me, which is a question and answer period, where the question was asked about you know, praying to Master Father Muhammad. What does it mean? And the answer from the Honorable Minister Farrakhan was just so crystal clear. It just set me on the path. So long story short, 96 is when I joined, after the Million Man March.
All praise due to Allah. Okay, we gotta stay right there on that point number 12. Thank you everyone who's showing love all across the country. My sister Miriam says assalamu alaikum. Our brother Nelson Rainbow says assalamu alaikum, beloved family from Massachusetts with love. My sister Naima sends the greetings. Brother Kenny Gross says assalamu alaikum. Dartmoor, NS Canada here. I don't know what NS means, so I'm sure you know the Canada language. I mean, like the exact location. Shout out to everyone who is showing love all across the country. Can't wait to put this on YouTube. Please let us know what city you all are watching from as we speak with our brother Roger from Canada, Quebec, Montreal, Canada. Boom, got it. Brother Roger, what was the answer that was given about point number 12? Because people still, that can be a stumbling block for many people.
Well, I mean, my big challenge, you know, mentally, I guess, and intellectually, was the notion of, well, you know, when we talk about the originator of the heavens and the earth, and, you know, who originated, you know, the universe and so on.
Yes,
it was difficult for me to reconcile. And in the Muslim world, that's sort of the thing where it's difficult to reconcile the notion that, well, you know, how can, you know, Master Farad Muhammad be God if he's not the originator? And the Honorable Mr. Louis Farrakhan, in that he actually explained, you know, he said, well, you know, Master Farad Muhammad was born in 1877. So of course he cannot be the originator of the heavens and the earth. However, he explained, see, I think the main difference theologically between our teaching and notions of what you would call incarnation in other religions like Buddhism or Hinduism and other iterations. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad actually refers to that word specifically, incarnation, where we don't believe in incarnation, in that, you know, he explained how it's not that the entirety of the reality of God is inside one man, but is that God is in all of us, and he is the supreme manifestation of the originator of the heavens and the earth. And of course, that clicked, and then listening to who is God, and then that was a wrap. But one thing that I did answer to my brother who wrote me from Saudi Arabia as he was studying over there with the scholars, what I wrote back to him is that, and it's something I heard Minister Ishmael explain once, just a couple of years back. But I gave him to try to help him to understand. I gave him a hadith, what they call hadith Qudsi, and in which it says that when a man becomes so close to Allah, and performs all of the deeds, and essentially submits himself to the point where he becomes so close to Allah, Allah becomes the ears with which he hears, the eyes with which he sees, the feet with which he walks. That's Prophet Muhammad saying that. So now, what is the difference between that and saying that God came in the person of a man? That is exactly what that is saying. So, praise be to Allah. I mean, I think what's been interesting about that journey, because a lot of Muslims in 75, I mean, they did the opposite journey. They came, started with the nation, and then went on to Orthodox Islam, and some of them feeling like it was an evolution. And in fact, when I was in Indianapolis studying with the scholars from Islamabad, there were imams there from the community of Imam Waduddin. And if I may share the story, because I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting for the believers to know, and it ties back to something that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said to the minister when he said that all of you will leave me, but then all of you will come back. It ties back to that. And at the time, I didn't know, obviously, because I was not in the, I had not yet accepted my own fully. But with these imams, I remember I was sitting in a class with one of the high scholars from Islamabad, and he started going into the different deviations of Islam. And he started talking about the Honorable Elijah Muhammad as being one of those, if you will, branches that went off the path. And when I was with these imams, never did we speak about, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, the Honorable, none of that. But in the class, and there were quite a few of them, they turned, when they heard that scholar, even though they were imams and everything, when they heard that scholar talking harshly about the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, they just turned into FOI all of a sudden. And they started, and me, I was confused at the time. I'm listening to this. And they started saying, talking about what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught us about the diameter of the earth. And they started going into the lessons, which I later understood were the lessons, started quoting the lessons. And it's all of a sudden, now looking back, it's almost like all of the teaching came back to them and the fire came back into them. And it's only later coming into the teaching and hearing the minister say that I understood that many of them who say they left, in their heart of hearts, they could be the highest imams learning all the surahs and Arabic and so on, but in their heart of hearts, they have that teaching of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in them. So that is definitely something that, in hindsight, struck me thinking back on it. But it's I think sometimes it's in the language, and if you study the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan when he speaks to the Muslim world, and I've studied some of his interviews, there's a language that he uses that is able to, it's just in the way you frame things sometimes, and over the years we've been successful in speaking with brothers and sisters from the Middle East, brothers and sisters from various parts of the Muslim world, and getting them to say and to believe that the Black man is God. We've had those conversations, but I think that when the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said that the Muslim world may need just a little bit more, that's why there's another book also coming for them. But it's really in the language and learning. When the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said to the minister, find a way to unite with the Muslim world. And I think we're seeing in Imam Sultan and Imam Abdul Salam, we're seeing great examples of that, in terms of just framing the language in a way that can bridge the gap. But gradually they will come on to understand who Master Father Muhammad, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan are. I am convinced of that.
Beautiful. All praises to Allah. Excellent job, Brother Roger, and people showing you love all across the country. Brother Kenny said he's from Nova Scotia.
Oh, Nova Scotia. Come on now.
Sister Reva says Montreal, Canada. Sister Reva from Montreal, Canada, from Ottawa. She said Islamic family from Ottawa, Canada. Sister Anita Rose says, thanks for the reminder about incarceration. And Brother Felipe X is showing the fire sign. Praise be to Allah. Wonderful. Now, Brother Roger, how did your family and friends feel about you accepting the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad?
Ooh, brother, the thing about it is, because I guess at the time, I was perceived as someone who was quote unquote, who had quote unquote a higher Islamic education. It was rough. It was rough because a lot of people were really, really upset with me and not understanding, how supposedly someone of my Islamic education would make that turn. But who knows, maybe Allah used that as a sign for them to challenge them. But it was a bit difficult also because, when I had joined Orthodox Islam at the time, and, I had gone to, for some reason, they had interviewed me on a whole bunch of different television shows, because I think initially, because it was a group of us, a lot of we were young, like 16, 17, 18. And so we had a large group of us, brothers, mostly, and some sisters, because in Canada, in Montreal, like we mostly have brothers and sisters from Africa and the Caribbean. And so, and where I'm from is mostly Haitian. And so we had a large group of Haitian brothers and sisters just, becoming Orthodox Muslim, and it kind of made a certain spark. And people, I guess, maybe some people might have thought that it was the nation and then found out it was Orthodox Islam. So there was a certain, if you will, media attention around that at the time. I was part of a documentary where I would get stopped in the streets. Oh, you the brother we saw in the documentary? And I had a big beard like this, brother. I really looked like Arab back then, I tell you. But, so because I was a quote unquote somewhat recognizable figure in the community, it came in as a shock for a lot of people. So we had to get through that, but by the grace of Allah, you know, that was actually, you know, a blessing, because even I mean, some years back when Dr. Alim came in the city, and, you know, we were just talking about a little bit of that history, and he said, brother, you know, that's a different kind of history that you got, a different kind of path. And there's something about that, you know, might be useful for you know, maybe in helping other brothers and sisters in the Islamic world perhaps understand the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Honorable Mr. Louis Farrakhan, you know, from their perspective. But at the beginning, it was, you know, it was a bit challenging, you know, but it all turned out okay. And man, you know, I would say this to my Orthodox or Sunni or Shiite brothers and sisters: once you really get to learn the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, you know, it just takes your understanding of Islam to such a high level.
Mm.
When we say it's the supreme wisdom, brother, it's the supreme wisdom. And you can go back after and read some of the words of Prophet Muhammad, and go back and read certain aspects of the Quran and understand it in ways that you never would have understood it without that teaching. So, you know, it's really just education, just reaching out to our brothers and sisters with the knowledge, and not being judgmental. You know, they've like the messenger said, they've had the scripture for a certain amount of time, so it might take them a little longer, but if we explain it the right way, they'll come around. They'll come around. And as they are. I mean, we saw it in '97 in the Islamic conference when they turbaned the minister, right? So and how even the Abuna Sheikh in Medina, that Sheikh was 105 years old, who gave the minister his staff.
Yes, sir.
And, you know, I mean, you gotta understand, Brother Joshua, in the Muslim world, that's a really, really, really big deal. Like that's the imam of the imams.
Yes, sir. Yes,
For
sir.
real, for real. So, so if they could come around, then obviously I think the rest will come to see that they don't have to look for the Mahdi and the Messiah anymore. They are already in our midst.
I'll walk by your teacher, bro. Roger, your teacher. Yes, sir. Okay, well,
I didn't mean to, bro. You just got me going there, bro. Sorry.
yes, sir. But speaking of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, you spoke before we went live about your interaction with him, meeting him, and
Briefly.
What was said. Could you share that with us?
Yes, well, I met him, you know, very, very briefly, you know, in Chicago, along with my brother, the student coordinator in Toronto, Brother Stafford Muhammad. That was the first time we both had gotten to meet him at Mosque Maryam after actually the Savior's Day, 2017, I think, part 2.
Mm.
And you know, he did say that he had learned, he said this a few times, that he had learned some valuable lessons in Montreal, but he didn't say what those lessons were.
Mm.
And he was, you know, he would explain, you know, certain things, and then go back and say, you know, I learned a lot of valuable lessons in Montreal. And then he would say, you know, there must be something special about Montreal if that's where, you know, he got that. He said, if that's where the charmer got his start from, because that Montreal is the city where the minister got the name the charmer. And when Brother Abdul Qiyam came to Montreal for his book tour for Teaching 2.0, actually he was sent also on a mission to find that spot where the minister was playing Calypso. We actually found where that spot was, and, you know, got some pictures and so on, and sent them a report and everything. But yes, you know, Montreal is where the minister got his name, the charmer. So what is that specialness about Montreal? We got to work to find out. We got to work to find out. We got to put in that work. But inshallah, we will hopefully bring it about through our work, And one thing I must say, Montreal actually, and a lot of people may not know this, but in 1997, I was, still just rank and file and just but Montreal had grown to the point where the then regional minister emeritus Don Mohammed, back then, had given Montreal a actual mosque number. And we were the second city internationally to get a mosque. So we became Mohammed Mosque. Well, the Mohammed Mosque number 1 is London, and we became Mohammed Mosque number 2 international. And so, but unfortunately, in fact, ironically, I don't like to use the word ironically, but after 97, and that's a rough story, by the way, Brother Joshua, but I think it's important to tell it, because there's lessons in all those things. The minister at the time, who was, from Albany, New York, and who was over the different cities, Ottawa and Montreal, after in 97, just as we were about to get the mosque status fully, we did get it, but we were just in that process. But then the International Islamic Conference came along, and I just joined Islam just a year ago, and I was happy because it was like, to me, it's like I was seeing that, it's almost like the transition for me. It made it even like simpler seeing this, and I was joyous to see the rest of the Muslim world embrace the man who I came to recognize as the Jesus in my life. And when they put the turban on him, and that whole beautiful conference took place, some in the nation saw that as the minister going hypocrite and turning toward the way of Imam Warid. And unfortunately, one of those ministers was the minister over us, who was supervising us. And as a result of that, he decided that he was going to break away from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam. And that created a tremendous explosion, a split. That was our 75 Malcolm X all wrapped up in one for our city. I won't go into some of the more rough details of it, but it was a really hard experience. That threw off a lot of people in the process, that kind of fell off in the process. But that event, and that caused some to turn, against the minister, and that minister to break off, and take more than half of the mosque with him, brother. So, which means that our numbers went down automatically. We had to rebuild from scratch with at the time the coordinator, Brother Stacy Muhammad, and brother who is now Abdul Sabir, my great brother here, who was the captain back then and ultimately became coordinator before I came on the post. But it was a rough time, and we unfortunately lost that status. But I want to say in a joyful way that that was a trial, and to all the international cities out there, you're not going to get number 2. We're going to take the number 2 back. Just so you know. I know Trinidad, you're doing good. I know Toronto, you're doing good. I know, Paris, you're doing good. But no, we by the grace of Allah, we will reinstate. That's the goal, and the believers are pumped up to reestablish that mosque, inshallah.
Oh, praise to Allah. Excellent. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. People are showing you love all across the country. Peace to the gods and the earth. Peace to Montreal, Mighty FYMGT. This is Brother Muchi Kapanga. Thank you, sir. Peace to the gods. Garvin Guerrera says that's 100% correct. And Brother Felipe X says, inshallah, beautiful, wonderful. Thank you all for showing love. Brother Roger, we have a few more questions for you because you've given us some great information as well as inspiration, but we have a quick 60-second commercial break. For all of the sponsors of the People's Podcast, this is starting this new year off. We thank Allah for you all. Every anonymous donation, every cash app, we appreciate it. And then we're coming right back to our brother Roger A. Muhammad. 1 second. Yeah, okay.
Premiere. He has a 4K camera and a drone. He does television and film editing. Please reach out to him if you need any of those services. Sister Miriam's ABC I Love Me, children's book and coloring book, and now Spanish book. All three available on Amazon.com. Stay On Point Dance Academy, LLC. She teaches ballet virtually to young girls all across the country, right here in the studios of Atlanta, Georgia. Like mediation, squashing the beast throughout the Southwest region, he does a phenomenal job. His wife, Sister Fudia Muhammad's, giving birth to a god and the science of child rearing. Please make sure you go out and get a copy in the best of fashion. Brother Kenneth's bow tie maker extraordinaire. He'll ship you bow ties anywhere across the nation. Taj Hollywood's Chemistry 6 episode, a new television series out on YouTube. He's looking for actors and writers. Make sure you support him. Keep It Hood, helping others overcome depression. Also by Taj Hollywood. Brother Aaron's Elevated Places, stress management, real estate, credit, repair, and restoration. His Respect for Life Center, they do personal wellness, philosophy, emotional, and mental spiritual wellness. 229-344-1474. Dr. Henry Carter's King Henry Turkey Legs, right here in Atlanta, Georgia. Brother Rashad Muhammad's COVID-19 disinfected cleaning services out of Chicago. Student Minister Sharif Muhammad's book, A Soldier in the Movement of Christ, available on adulsharif.com. And lastly, Brother Joshua Muhammad's book, Cleopatra, as well as No Father, No Excuse, both available
on Amazon.com. Thank you all very much. We're right back to our brother Roger A. Muhammad, and thank you everyone who's showing love all across the country. Now, Brother Roger, I always speak to believers who live in the States and say, depending on what city, if you can see another believer at the gas station, grocery store, man, it's just a good thing. But to have...
Oh, brother, I didn't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you. Yes, I lost a little piece.
Okay, yes, sir. Now.
Oh, I lost you again. Let me just make sure Can you hear me all right?
So I can hear you good. Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Yes, sir. Perfect. I was just saluting all of the believers in Canada for holding it, for being strong. Man, in the absence of seeing everybody else, that we have the benefit of just bumping into believers wherever we go, but you all are holding it down. So may Allah continue to bless you. I wanted to ask you, sir, has there ever been a time when you've been faced with fear? And if so, how did you overcome that fear?
Oh, yes. Yeah, definitely. Quite a few times in my life, that's for sure. Like, I mean, I come on sometimes and I admire those who say, like, they just have no fear. Like, I'm not the one, I can't say that. One of my, I guess the main fear, if you will, especially after seeing, or experiencing, a situation where you see so many people falling off and in such a dramatic way, is you always fear turning hypocrite, and I think that to some extent it is a healthy fear, in that and if I may, there's one anecdote that I can think of from the hadith actually, where when there was a verse from the Holy Quran that was being revealed to the Prophet Muhammad about the hypocrites, and then the companions formed around him, and one of his top companions was Umar ibn al-Khattab, one of the great caliphs, who became one of the four caliphs, went up because there was a list of hypocrites that was revealed to the Prophet. And he went up to the Prophet and said, "Oh, Prophet, am I on that list? Am I on that list?" So to think that even the highest ranking companion of the Prophet would be worried in his heart and would have this tremor that he fears being on that list of hypocrites. Means that the lesson in that is that none of us are safe. And so sometimes what may happen is that when we become a little too confident, arrogant, in our own understanding, in our own, knowledge, if you will, that, I know the teaching, I got this, and, I would never leave the minister, and then so on and so forth. And, that's when sometimes we could put ourselves in danger, So to be mindful, to remain, as our general orders say, to keeping always on the alert, right? To walk our post in the perfect manner, keeping always on the alert. But it is a genuine, when I say fear, in that if you put it in perspective, according to the Quran and according to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's teaching, that's the lowest, that's the worst state that you could be in. And none of us are, exempt from falling into that after we receive, this life-giving teaching. So, in a very general sense, I would answer that. But there are, of course, many other things I could say on a much more personal level, that where been faced with fear. But that would be definitely at the center. You always, in my prayers, I always say to Allah, being trained as a scientist and so on. So I say to Allah, "Oh Allah, please don't make me a failed experiment," because all of us are striving. We're going through trials, and that's what experiments are. You go through trials, errors, you learn, you grow, and you some unfortunately through certain trials become fail the experiment, fail the process, fall out of the process. So I always ask Allah, please don't make me a failed experiment. Help me to stick to this all the way through, till it's over, hopefully 1,000 years from now, because we all followed how to eat to live.
Yes, sir. Now, Brother Roger, you said something about science. Could you elaborate?
Oh no, I was just saying that, in terms of in my day-to-day, work and like I am actually a data scientist. So I like I have a
That's what I meant. That's what I meant. Let us know. I didn't know. Okay, you're a data scientist. Let us know about that, please.
Yes, well, I mean, essentially, data science, if you will, is interestingly enough, the closest thing I found to, in a very, 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 very small way, but the closest thing I found to, when you describe the 24 scientists and how they predict the future,
Yes,
because
sir.
the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said it like this. He said, there are only two ways that you can learn prophecy. You're either born with the gift, that's in closing the gap. You're either born with the gift, or you learn it through a thorough study of mathematics. And I started on that path when I took my first statistics class, and I just fell in love with that. and just learning mathematics and computer science and so on, and we often talk about these algorithms, but really what these algorithms are, Brother Joshua, is just, and these AI, these basically artificial intelligence systems, is just really an advanced study of statistics with a lot of data that allows you to look at variables, because when an algorithm actually predicts an outcome, what is it actually doing? When you're on Facebook or on YouTube, so that's kind of stuff I work with and study with the algorithms and so on. Like a lot of people talk about GTP, that's actually, I did my thesis on the technology behind that in master's degree. But really, what is it? What is it made of? It's simple. It's relatively, in the sense that recommendation system on your Instagram feed is really just taking, thousands of variables about your behavior, things that you did, things that you clicked on, your history, and then is able to identify a pattern that gives it the ability to predict the probability of something happening. And in that sense, the physicist Niels Bohr said that prediction is difficult, especially of the future, but really what he was referring to was the power of mathematics to predict. And the more you study statistics and what is behind those algorithms and the universal mathematical principles that undergird them, you realize just how powerful. When we say Islam is mathematics and mathematics is Islam, it is very much real. Like, you can predict so much. And Imam Elijah Muhammad said that of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward the researcher. That's not just history in the humanities, because what you do in data science, essentially you take historical data, you analyze the mathematical patterns behind it, and you apply it to make a prediction, which is what an AI model does. So I didn't expect to talk about that side of myself, but that's what I do.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Brother, listen, you inspiring the whole nation, the whole world out here. Thank you for, letting us know that you can go there too. Perfect. All right. Yes, I wanted to ask you, what advice would you give to future husbands?
Oh, man. Well, future husbands, so to qualify the question, if you're not married yet.
Correct.
And to further qualify the question, if you're not married yet and you happen to be in the FOI ranks.
Okay.
If you're not, then the first advice would be join the FOI. That would be the first one. Because that is a dependent variable for the second variable in the equation, which is that we really underestimate, and unfortunately, because of the restrictions and the travel restrictions, we weren't able to attend Brother Nuri's great seminar in New York this weekend with Student Minister Arthur, the great Student Minister Arthur in New York. But we underestimate the beauty and power of the courtship process that is in the Nation of Islam. And we live in a world where there's so much information, and we get advice left and right. It's like with diets, right? We get all kinds of like keto diet, this diet, that diet, and we sometimes derail from the basics. And I would say that if we would just adhere to the process strictly, where it allows you to really go into who, your future mate is, asking the right questions, preparing yourself, qualifying yourself, and also making sure the person you're about to marry is qualified, is so crucial. Like, we've been given the formula. And one thing, if I may say in a general sense, and I don't want to, go off on a tangent, but I'll bring it right back. Sometimes, and as one who's had the opportunity to study a lot of the different, well, yes, I'm academically trained and professionally trained in science, but also the management sciences and all these different models and concepts. And we sometimes make the mistake as believers to overplay those things. And we find them, we find that these foreign concepts, like Minister Ishmael was talking about, these currents that we're sometimes taking. And I, some years back was making that mistake, where I would try to come with all these fancy concepts and ideas and so on. And, and you ultimately realize that those things are only efficient and functional if they're applied as a subjugate to the framework that was given to us by the most honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And sometimes we think that we undermine how incredibly supreme the wisdom we have been given is, and we try to graft things on top of it, when if you just strip all that noise away and just stick to that basic formula, which is just a courtship process, and listening to the minister's lectures on how to prepare for marriage and following that to the letter, how that can help you. Because not everyone in here, I'm about to put in a nice plug for my wife, not everyone is as blessed as I am to have, where my wife actually, because I got to tell you, because there was a point where I fell off. I was talking about my fear of being a hypocrite. There was a point where my own disappointment, my own frustration with certain things made me fall off. And then that's when I met my would-be wife, and I fell off kind of hard. And I went back to rap, kind of like the minister went back to me. I went back to rap, and I was going all into it and going wild. But that was actually causing trouble in my couple at the time with my wife. And then I gave her a book. I wasn't even thinking about necessarily coming back to the teaching. But during that argument, I lent her a book from Dr. Minister Ava Muhammad, may Allah be pleased with her, our great sister, called The Force and Power of Being, which was a book that impacted me tremendously. And I felt, I said, what you're going through, I think you should read this book. But I had no intention, because myself, I was already kind of, away from the teaching. And she read the book, and she fell in love with the teacher right there and then. Like it just, like it was over from there. And when I met my wife, I always said to myself, man, that woman's an MGT. You know what I mean? Like in my head, like she's an MGT for real. Like she just doesn't know it. But I was too astray to appreciate that. But thankfully, brother Joshua, really it was through her coming into the teaching that she became, I don't know if you're familiar with, the story of Osad and Osset, or Osiris and Isis and the resurrection. Yes, like she was my Isis. She was the source of my resurrection, coming back to the teaching, because through her, I was able to come back. And I say that because, then we got married, but I mean, she's really so dedicated, and she, is such an inspiration to me in terms of staying true to the teaching. And she's very much on it. That is a blessing, but you may not, if you don't leave it up to the laws of probability, let's just say, that you're going to meet someone like that, because you may meet that person, but you need to vet that person in any other circumstance through that process of courtship, so that you can be assured that you have that person that is a soulmate to you. And it may seem simplistic, but if we follow it to the letter, I seen those who follow it and have success, and those who haven't and struggle. But we don't need to reinvent the wheel, brother. As with other aspects, personally, I'm at that junction where I just want to stick to the basics. I want to stick to the core, because our success is It's already been laid out for us. We don't need to, we can get some hints and insights from outside, but everything we need is right there in this teaching.
Beautiful. All praise due to Allah. You teaching, Brother Roger.
I'm sorry, brother. I just sometimes I go off like that, brother. This is
people show you love all across the country. Thank you, brother. Thank you, Garvin. Thank you, Danita, MM74 to the world, blow down, Naptown. We said, okay, thank you for that. My sister Naima says, beautiful, with your teaching and expression of the word of God, Brother Roger. Future fathers. What advice would you have for future fathers, Brother Roger?
Oh, well, when you become, my first advice, again, there's a dependent variable. So the first dependent variable to the next is that you should study how to give birth to a God. That's the prerequisite, from day one, like study those elements. Once you've studied that, one mistake that we might make as young parents sometimes is that we're not necessarily all at that stage where we're not Alfonso, we're not the God where we have so much power to direct our children toward their ultimate destiny. We're not at that. We're very far from that stage of development. Let's just put, that's an understatement, I think. So we have to be careful when we project onto our children our own aspirations, as opposed to trying to discover their own gifts. With my first daughter, I had this projection. I wanted her to be an astrophysicist. I became, a scientist in more the computer and AI world, but I wanted her to be, because I always wanted to be a physicist, and I might actually go back and do that PhD one day. But I wanted her to be an astrophysicist because that was the first choice that I had, but I never got to do it. And I started teaching her at a very young age. She was like 2 years old. She could tell you the names of the different bosons and the different subatomic particles. She could tell you off the top of her head. And I remember I'd bring it to the study group and say, "Come on, tell the believers about all the different subatomic particles." And she would do it in her joyful way. But as she grew up, she had her own gifts, her own interests, her own talents. And sometimes you may get, it's also, and I would impress on her, like, you're going to become an astrophysicist. And then it can create a situation where the child is going to feel bad because they want to please their parents, and they'll try to take that route. But if it's not what Allah has truly deposited, because we're not necessarily as young parents equipped to know what that talent is actually about. So instead of trying to project your own aspirations of what you think is best for your child, try to get in the process of discovery. Try to discover, and that's something my wife often tells me, discover the gifts that are deposited in your child by exposing them to different things and seeing where their natural interest is, and then try to nurture that interest and guide it, because otherwise they may grow up, and by the grace of Allah, that is not the case in my house, at least so far. But we've seen, situations where the child may begin to rebel, because if you put that kind of pressure on a child where you impose on them your own aspirations as opposed to trying to extract their own gifts, you create this polarity in their minds. And that polarity can ultimately turn to rebellion, where they just want to veer away completely from you because they can't stand that pressure anymore. So they go back out into the world where they can find expression, where they can find validation, where they can find people who will appreciate those gifts, and then we alienate ourselves from our children in that process. So we have to be humble and, be more in discovery mode as opposed to aspiration mode. And from that, be humble also with our children, because what may happen sometimes is they see our shortcomings. And if we present ourselves as holier than thou, when we reprimand them and when we discipline them, and we take on an attitude where you discipline your child, but then they see you turn the corner and do something a little bit off, in the back of their head, it registers, even if it's subconsciously. So we may in the process, again, create situations where we alienate them because they can see through, they begin to actually interpret what we do as a bit being hypocritical. So I try to be upfront that my children are still young, but to tell them, look, sometimes I tell my children to clean up this, part of the house, that part of the house. Sometimes my closet is a mess, but but I tell them, I know my closet is a mess sometimes, and I strive to do better. I try to, but it's not because I'm not telling you something that, where do as I do, don't do, like do as I say, don't do as I do, but tell them that you're striving along with them. Tell them that you're struggling too. Tell them that sometimes you're having a hard time doing the things that you're asking them to do. And then they will respect you for it. And then they will begin to value that advice more than if you try to present yourself in that, holier than thou kind of image, because, again, we're just not there.
Excellent, Sister Raja. Praise be to Allah. And people are showing you love all across the country. And Brother Garvin says, EDU equals education to draw out your heart, that which is deposited by Allah. People just bear witness.
If that's the Brother Garvin from Montreal, that's the Brother Garvin that introduced me to that book that set me on that path. And that brother who was our lieutenant, but also just one of the most brilliant brothers I have ever met. He's inspired me to ultimately become a scientist. Just listening to that brother. We have wonderful, believers all over the nation. Wonderful people that are just so amazing. And man, that's why we got to get in nation building mode, because so much talent, we got to take it to the next level.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Excellent. Okay. Well, earlier you spoke of your rap and career and your music. If you could choose your favorite album of all time, what would it be, sir?
Ooh, man, that's a hard question. If I only had to single out one, I would say that the artist that all in all, pound for pound, that influenced me the most was Nas. Nas, and if I could just put on my hip hop hat for a minute, a pure hip hop hat, if I don't necessarily take into consideration, conscious lyrics, per se, and if I just look at it for just the lyricism, quality of the music, the enhancements and so on, like a pound for pound, all-time classic for me is definitely Illmatic. Nas is Illmatic in terms of, just pure, that pure New York hip hop that I came up under. But to say that if that's my favorite album, not necessarily. I can't think of a favorite, but I would say that that's the album that in terms of respect, that I put up there as like a 5 mic all-time classic. But there's a group out there for all those, who want to keep their ears righteous, even though they split up now, or hopefully they'll get back together. But there's a group out there called Dean Squad. And, I would say that if I had to drop all music and just keep one thing going in terms of albums that are out there that are, commercially somewhat respected and known, it will probably be Dean Squad, because their music is so, and whenever me and my wife listen to it, I said, man, I wish the minister would, I'm sure the minister would just love, maybe he knows them already, but he would just love to hear them. The spirit that they have of Islam that they carry through, but in a very lively, youthful, real hip hop way where, you really get into the music and it feels good. Dean Squad, go check it out. So I'm doing a little promo for them. But no, Dean Squad is, and they from Ottawa, by the way. They're known internationally now, but they're from Ottawa, Canada. So I'm supporting my own. There you go.
There you go. All praise to Allah. Shout out to Dean Squad. Yes, sir. All right. Brother Roger, what would you like your legacy to be, sir?
Man, well, if I can be of service, to my nation, well, there are two things. There are two areas where I would hope to contribute, if it be the will of Allah. One is, of course, we try to translate as much of the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Honorable Minister Farrakhan in French, because there are so many of our French brothers and sisters who don't have access to English. So we do a lot of translation in the city. I've actually written a couple of books in French, that presented teaching, translated many with my wife and others. We translated, and then brothers and sisters in Paris, trying to translate, the books of the messenger, the lectures of the minister. So I think that hopefully is going to be something that is going to expand, and that is going to, we're actively, like every single week, we translate the study guide material. Like every single Friday, we have it in French and English. And so hopefully that will, and we send it out to, brother student minister Troy. And we hope that this will help, along with the brothers and sisters in France, to get the teaching out in that language, as I know others are doing it in Spanish and in other languages. And on another level, because as I mentioned, science is really something that I'm really in love with. And Islam is mathematics. I do hope to help the believers. There's another book that I wrote, not to do a cheap plug, but just saying that it's called Who is the Original Man, Part 1, A Molecular Anthropology of Pre-Adamic Civilization. And in that, the preface was written by Dr. Ridgely Muhammad, who I'm so thankful to, for writing the preface. But in that, we try to really bring up scientific arguments that show, that prove, the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And there are so many amazing scholars that I look up to that do it on so many levels. But if I'm able to, having studied things like quantum mechanics and, statistics and AI and so on, if I'm able to sort of, because I discover in those fields so many things that I'm like, the same way I made that discovery with Orthodox Islam, as I go deeper into the world of mathematics and science, I'm like, wow, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught that. This is in the teaching, And I remember I was sharing with Minister Kadir when he came up once, and I share this with some believers sometimes, just a trivial, what may seem like a trivial fact, but think on it. In the supreme wisdom, in the supreme wisdom, we're given, I believe in the problem, but we're given the number of atoms in the universe.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it's a 10 followed by a bunch of zeros. And, like I talked about astrophysics, which is something that I wanted to get into earlier in my academic life. And if you count, one day I counted all the zeros. I said, you know what, how many zeros are there? In fact, and I counted them. And as it turns out, there are 78 zeros. Now, if you go and read the books of astrophysics and advanced physics, and I recommend to all the believers, there's a great book called Just Six Figures by Martin Rees, great astrophysicist from Britain. And if you look at what we know in modern science in terms of the number of atoms in the universe, it is 10 to the power of 78, which is exactly what we have in our supreme wisdom. And so there are so many layers of advanced science, Brother Joshua. And I think that if we just let the world know, you know, and Mother Tynetta talked about how we have to elevate our language to, you know, speak to, you know, I'd love to get into a debate with an Elon Musk or Jordan Peterson or people on that level to say, okay, let's go. Let's bring your best scientists, bring your math, because once you know the math, if you understand the equations that sometimes maybe, and that should not be scary to us, but once we understand the equations that make up, you know, the science that we look, the technology that is around us, then all of a sudden we're in a different position to argue from a completely different perspective. And I think that perspective should be, you know, should be put out there, you know. So inshallah, we hope to do that. And second cheap plug, brother, I have another little book called Equations of Life that will attempt to that will be more centered on learning to master the dynamics of ego. And here there's some science in there, but it's entirely rooted in self-improvement and the study guides and closing the gap, but to really work on another big problem that we have as a people is to overcome the ego. And I know I'm in that journey myself. And so that book was written using some elements of what we know in science and neuroscience, and then rooting that in closing the gap and the study guides to make that bridge between science and the teaching that can help us to value the self-improvement study guides even more, hopefully. And you know, there's a brother, one of our great scholars, I'm not going to name him to not put him on the spot, but I'm waiting for his preface. And brother, if you're listening, you know, so we pray Allah. I'm holding out for you, brother. But inshallah, you know, I mean, legacy is a big word, but if that could be a contribution, then all praise due to Allah if that can serve.
Beautiful, excellent. The scientist, brother Rajay Muhammad, yes, sir. And people are showing you love all across the country. And your brother, Brother Garvin, I said all praise due to Allah for our family. Thank you all very much. I can't wait to put this on YouTube. Brother Raj, I want to thank you on behalf of myself, my family, and the viewing audience of the People's Podcast for your sacrifice and the sacrifices of your family as well, and the believers of Canada. May Allah continue to bless you and bless you all. This is Joshua Leonard Muhammad signing off for the People's Podcast. Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Wa alaikum salam, and thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
And thank you all for watching. Assalamu alaikum. There we go.